It feels like it was only yesterday when companies big and small flooded the market with all kinds of arcade-style racing games. From Burnout to Midnight Club to Automodelista, it seemed like everyone wanted in on the action. Of course, it wasn't just yesterday, but more like 15 years ago. These days, you have to go out of your way just to find an over-the-top racer that isn't a remastered port of a decade-old game or filled with go-karts. That's one of the reasons I was so excited to get behind the wheel of Xenon Racer, a speedy new game that picks up right where Ridge Racer left off. And maybe, if we're really lucky, this will be the first salvo in a new era filled with drift-heavy arcade racers. I can dream, can't I? Set just 11 years from now, Xenon Racer is not your typical futuristic racing game. We aren't piloting hovercrafts, making death-defying jumps, or launching missiles, because this is a lot more grounded than something like Wipeout or F-Zero. This is a future where cars are only a little more advanced and will occasionally change shapes as you pick up speed. The most noticeable difference comes from the locations and backgrounds, which are not only colorful and bursting with personality, but also just futuristic enough to feel a little alien and unsettling. I likened this to Ridge Racer at the top, and that wasn't by accident. With its focus on drifting, Xenon Racer reminds me a lot of Namco's long-running franchise. It's over the top like a lot of arcade racers, but not in a violently aggressive way like we saw in the Burnout franchise. Drifting is your main weapon against these tracks, and you'll find that maintaining that drift will slowly increase the boost gauge. You'll be able to hold up to 3 boosts at the same time, so charge them up and unleash them whenever you get a little behind or go into a straight stretch. The game is split into several different modes, with the biggest draw being the Xenon Racing Championship. This is a lengthy and elaborate campaign with multiple paths and all kinds of events to complete. This is the way you unlock new tracks and cars, though you won't always be able to customize your vehicle. In most cases, you'll only have a choice between a half-dozen cars, and any tinkering in the garage is strictly off limits. I respect the simplicity, but wish the developers would have given us a little more control over the single-player campaign. While we may not be in flying cars or racing on the moon, there are a lot of signs that this is in fact the future. It's the 7 different cities that really sell the illusion, including Boston, Miami, Shanghai, Dubai, Canada, and more. Seeing as this is only a decade down the road, Xenon Racer does a good job of sprinkling in new architecture and technology without feeling like it needs to reinvent these cities. There's a level of restraint here that you don't normally see in a futuristic racing game, and yet it's clear that there will be major enhancements over the next 11 years. Airplanes look a little different, drones are everywhere, holograms are taken over, and you'll even race against a flying craft straight out of Star Wars. And yet, despite the obvious enhancements, these iconic locations largely remain the same. There's a nice mix of new and old. It's worth mentioning that each of the 7 cities have several different tracks to race, including reversed versions where you speed through the course in the opposite direction. It's also nice that these tracks can be played during the day, night, and dawn, giving the stages a slightly different ambiance. The problem is that there simply aren't enough tracks to race. Sure, I like that each location has different courses, reverse runs, and even day and night versions, but you see the same, admittedly cool, backgrounds a few too many times before the end of the campaign. It would have been nice to have a few more cities to race through, even if it's at the expense of the alternate versions of Miami and Boston. On the topic of disappointments, this is the part of the review where I roll my eyes at the aggressive AI. On second thought, that's not exactly fair because the computer opponents are all over the place. Sometimes they'll get out to an early lead that's nearly impossible to overcome, while other times they'll barely put up a fight. What often happens is that you'll get out to a sizable lead and then, out of nowhere, the second place car will magically appear out of nowhere and then just suddenly make the final lap a real nightmare. And it's not because the difficulty ramps up, since the AI will drastically change each time you restart the race. I'd say the game is challenging, but often it's not. The difficulty's a bit of a mixed bag. There are other minor problems like the long load times and the occasional frame rate issues, but the truth is, none of these issues, including the repetitive tracks and weird AI, are enough to keep me from having a good time. Maybe it's because I'm starved for arcade racing games, but I had a lot of fun with Xenon Racer. Although I'm sure that some of it is just because I want to go fast and smash slightly futuristic cars out of my way, it's also due to the great graphics, challenging tracks, an exciting sense of speed. This is a well-made racing game with solid controls and a lot of content, including both online and split-screen multiplayer modes. If I had my way, we'd see a lot more games like Xenon Racer. While it doesn't do much to innovate on the formula, Xenon Racer is a well-crafted racing game with gorgeous levels, a deep campaign, and a nice variety of multiplayer modes. Unfortunately, the high-speed action is marred by inconsistent AI and the repetition of seeing the same few stages ad nauseum. If I'm being honest, it gets a lot more right than it gets wrong. If you've been waiting for Namco to resurrect Ridge Racer, then Xenon Racer is a great alternative while you wait. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now here's the question I have for you. What racing franchise is most in need of a revival? The obvious answers are games like Burnout and Ridge Racer, but I have a more obscure pick. I'd love to see Electronic Arts revive the Sledstorm franchise. Not the crummy PlayStation 2 game, but the really cool one that was on the PS1 that nobody talks about anymore for some reason. We also need a new Project Gotham Racing. Seriously, Microsoft, enough with the annual Forza games. Hell, at this point I'd settle for a new Midtown Madness. Anyway, leave your picks in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.